Welcome, and thanks for joining me as I try to describe what I have planned for my students this coming year as I plan to try to meet them where they're at in Talifer High School math class. Okay, so first, above all, I'm looking for mastery learning. What is mastery learning? Well, first, what is it not? So in a typical class, you hope that students fall as far to the left on this chart as possible. You want your A's, B's, and C's, but just because of how things go traditionally, you tend to keep moving on, even if they don't quite meet that criteria. So we're going to do away with that, and instead that's replaced with something that's a bit more like a cycle. So if they don't quite get it, you just give them a little more support, you give them a few more questions with it, and if they get it right away, you can just move on. So it's very student-paced in a positive way. Students are always working on a problem, ideally, where they're growing, and they're not just simply maintaining. So I haven't mastered linear equations yet. So everyone hopefully feels like they can eventually get there. All right, part of that is making sure gaps are filled, and some of those this teacher or student might not be aware of until you go looking for them. So we've got some tools available that can help pinpoint what exactly needs to be remediated, what holes need to be filled. Together, this creates a very powerful learning system that previous research has shown can really make your instructions optimal. As you can see, everyone on that bell curve moved to the right. Now, I'm hoping that our results look even more inspiring than that. Now, that might not be this year, but next year, perhaps, I imagine we'll get some just astoundingly exciting results. All right, so student autonomy. I think with this sort of system, students realize they can kind of take charge of their learning to an extent. And this is a light bulb that goes off in different ways throughout the course, and there's different ways student autonomy kind of manifests itself. But once they realize that, they realize that's empowering, and they can just take off. At least that's certainly my belief, and I think a lot of people have seen that happen. I think I've seen that happen to some extent in my classroom already. Learning math has often been compared to building a house, and we're going to go ahead and run, or should I say build, with that analogy. So probably the most fundamental thing, important thing to do when building a house is to lay bricks. So Khan Academy can be compared to laying the bricks. So this is the sort of work that is usually boring, giving out worksheets, giving lectures to the entire class instead of having a conversation with students one-on-one, that sort of thing. But what I would say is that not only does this get rid of the boring parts of the class, it replaces it with powerful, exciting things, such as way cooler questions and visualizations along with those questions. And so I feel like that picture doesn't do Khan Academy justice, so I am going to go ahead and add a little firework to it. Okay, so that by itself is great, but a house also needs to make sure it's got really solid foundations. This is not just remediation, making sure students get it. This is developing a deep understanding where students can really take the time to think about it themselves in, once again, an empowering way. And also it does a great job of unmasking hidden misconceptions about fundamental, important ideas. Now, when it comes to more recent material, we spruce it up. We try to take it to the next level. So a certain level of mastery is great, but we can do better than that. Students can even take it far enough to become classroom experts in certain topics. But you'll notice, hey, that building's kind of leaning over. There's got to be something wrong. So maybe there's some gaps missing. Oh, that's all right. We initiate home repair, and that's where mediation comes in. And finally, math, even with all of this, for a lot of students isn't the most interesting. I think a really powerful tool for making it more interesting will be to tell them that this neat stuff that I tell people, you can just plug in all sorts of cool things in. You can plug in the quadratics. You can plug not only numbers into them, but in a sense ideas into them. Ideas about parabolic cookers and Newtonian physics. And so I think science will be able to make these abstract ideas come alive, and I'm happy to be hopefully working with Miss Drain on that. Okay, so I think what comes to mind first is how are the instructional options going to change? I think what a lot of us have used in the classroom in the past is this sage on the stage approach, as it's sometimes called, where it's really difficult to have all the students engaged, be doing something where the low-level students are not lost and getting almost nothing out of it, that the high-level students aren't bored. And so how do you remediate that? Well, it's designed so students are starting the new material at different times, which means you can have this replaced by instructional discourse, which is a one-on-one interaction. It's a conversation with the student that you can't help but know if they're getting it. They can't help but be somewhat engaged. But that's not their only option. The program of Khan Academy also has step-by-step guided problems. And they also, if you really want them to, hit this with the high caliber instruction, they've got really high quality instructional videos, and in any problem they're working on, new or old, both of these are just a click away, and I'm just a name away, Mr. Traxler. All right, so at another stage in instruction, where we're working on fundamentals or mastery enrichment, where there's going to be other classroom methods. So it's going to be even less this idea of someone is transferring knowledge to you. It's going to be more about classroom-wide discussion or a smaller group discussion. And my role, much more than it is a transfer of knowledge, is going to be asking those good questions, hinting, being that that person that helps generate the thought, get them a sense of where they're going to think about something next. More of a guide than anything. And then when it comes to remediation, well, gosh, apparently the stuff that came before didn't work, so we'll try that again, but we'll try whatever we think works, whatever we think is going to stick. All right. So let's talk about each little piece a little more. Khan Academy, what are some things it does for the student? It gives them, once again, starting to develop that autonomy where they're able to choose how they learn. They're able to choose a lot of the direction for where they learn next. And mastery learning. So here's one of those cycles I referred to earlier. Students have to develop a certain proficiency by getting a certain amount right just to say they've learned it. And they have to do something similar to that over a period of time, so days, where they're periodically given questions in order to be able to say they've mastered it. Once they've mastered it, then they're ready for the new skills. So they never feel like things are getting in too deep. They just feel like, well, it's the next thing I need to work on. This usually goes well, and we've got remediation options available for when it doesn't. So that brings to testing. So testing is flexible. You can choose to do it, the week that you're first available to do it, but maybe you haven't mastered all of the material. Tests are generally only taken after students have shown a decent degree of proficiency in all material. So they should already know it. In other words, they've already, in a way, been through a certain kind of test to see that they actually know the material. This also has embedded in it reinforcement of past material. And if they meet less than 90%, that means remediation. Okay, let's talk a little bit about remediation and what I'll call remedial testing. Okay, so when you get remedial testing, Khan Academy will sometimes just tell me, and then I can group them up according to what they are having trouble with. Other times, it's much more obvious. They miss a problem on an exam. So remediation actions, so these are, I guess, you might think of as part two to those options we looked at earlier. We might look at additional problems that are a little different from what they've looked at before. Got lots of resources for that. Now this is where things get particularly interesting test-wise. I want to have an A or nay policy. So maybe they do really well on the test. Hey, that's great. Celebrate. Maybe they miss, let's say, 2 questions away from getting an A. So maybe they got a 70%. In other words, it's not the test we're really looking for. All right. Then we do remediation until they feel ready to do a remediation test. All right. So a remediation test for one question or skill type is doing 5 of those right in a row. With enough remediation, they can do that, or at least come close to doing it, right? They don't have to be perfect. At that point, I've decided, well, that skill is now demonstrated on that test. We just picked the most important skills that they missed on that test. And now we celebrate. So now they're back to a good test grade. So if they're willing to put in the time for the remediation with me, then everyone is able to get that A. And most of my hope is we'll get it initially. What does that mean? Well, that means a different paradigm for what a test even is. These tests are not are meant to be learning gap detectors, remediation detectors, and they are not meant to be performance measurers. Okay. So what does that mean? The only way for them to really do poorly in the course is just for them to not make adequate progress, and remediation could even slow them down in some ways. But I really believe once they get a solid foundation, once that's established, then they will be able to pick up speed. So this is embedded into this course. If students receive less than 100%, well, they can work hard and recover that 100%, but they're also required to stay after at least a couple days a week so that they can catch up. I haven't reached this week's progress goal yet. We're starting to see a pattern here. All right, so once again, those foundational materials I mentioned earlier, they're designed to really create the depth, and then these are the best materials that I've hardly seen, really, when it comes to group discussion. And I like it, my students like it, and there doesn't seem to be a skill cap. So even the really good students I've seen almost always get a lot out of this. And more than anything, they're formative assessment lessons. They're designed to uncover student misconceptions. You can think of this as an advanced level of remediation. Next, we're going to talk about mastery enrichment. So this is taking those skills that they've recently learned to the next level. I think Eureka Math will be a great resource for these types of lessons, but I also plan to collect some from various districts that are already performing really well. This is where the cohort model really takes off. So these will be designed for specific groups of students that are similar skill level. Maybe some are working at circle equations. Maybe others, right at this point, need some extra mastery strategies with systems of linear equations. I also look forward to the math and science collaboration. So in its simplest form, these are basically just going to be reviews I'm doing for Miss Drain, just ahead of time before she's going to need that math. But I do really hope to infuse some really cool science and other applications into my curriculum. Miss Drain and I might even share some assignments. But to talk about assignments more generally, this is where students have, again, a bit of flexibility. They need to hand in 8 assignments, but they've got options, and this is in addition to Khan Academy, but they've got a lot of different assignments from fundamental, mastery, enrichment, and science collaboration methods. They're able to replace their lowest grade if they turn in more. Presentations, I'm not going to talk about too much, but they're like Enrichment 2.0. Currently being done in pre-calculus. Not sure how much I'm going to implement these. Let's talk real quick about the grades and how those are going to work with the classroom structure. Talked about this a bit already. Khan Academy missions lead to mission progress grades, which lead to being able to do tests, which may lead to remediation, which leads to a remediation test, and then assignments can come from one of 3 locations. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day and school year.